Just one kiss, whispered the millionaire, bound by contract, yet destined for true love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. On a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan, the world seemed to move too fast for Claire Bennett. She clutched a stack of unpaid hospital bills against her chest as she rushed down the crowded sidewalk, the ink smudged by raindrops. Her younger brother was waiting for a costly surgery, and she had run out of time, run out of money, and run out of hope. Across town, Ethan Blackwell, the heir to one of America's most powerful real estate dynasties, was facing a very different storm. The board of directors had given him an ultimatum: settle down and prove his stability, or risk losing control of the empire his late father built. For Ethan, marriage was not about love. It was about leverage, about silencing shareholders, and about preserving power. That evening, fate dragged their two worlds into collision. Claire had been working late in a hotel lounge, taking an extra shift as a waitress to keep food on the table. Ethan walked in with his commanding presence, dark suit pressed to perfection, his every step radiating wealth and authority. Their eyes met for only a second, but that second changed everything. Ethan saw desperation in her tired expression, the kind of desperation money could solve. Claire, on the other hand, saw a man who carried the kind of arrogance that only someone born into millions could possess. She turned away quickly, but fate did not let her escape so easily. Within an hour, Ethan's assistant slid a crisp folder across Claire's table. Inside was a contract, clear, concise, and cold. 1 year, it read. A marriage in name only. Compensation guaranteed. Discretion required. The terms were outrageous, yet intoxicating. For Claire, the number at the bottom of the page meant her brother could live. Her hand trembled as she traced the black ink. "You want me to marry you? For money?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lounge. Ethan leaned closer, his tone calm, almost bored. "Not for money, for survival. You need it for your family. I need it for my company. This is business, Miss Bennett. Nothing more." The words sliced through her like a blade. Marriage reduced to a transaction. And yet, she could not deny the truth. Without this deal, she would lose everything. Claire closed the folder, her heart pounding. "And if I say no?" she asked. Ethan's gaze hardened. "Then I will find someone else. But something tells me you cannot afford to walk away." Outside, the rain hammered the glass, as if the city itself knew that a decision was about to seal both their fates. Claire lifted her chin, masking the fear in her chest with borrowed strength. "Fine, 1 year. But do not forget you asked for a wife in name only." Ethan's lips curved into a faint, almost mocking smile. "Trust me, Miss Bennett, I never forget my own terms." And with the scratch of a pen against paper, the contract was signed. Two signatures bound together by ink, but worlds apart in heart. What neither of them knew, on that rainy night in New York City, was that a single kiss, planned as nothing more than an act, would unravel every line of that cold contract, and ignite a fire neither of them could control. The ink on the contract was barely dry when Claire found herself standing in the vast marble foyer of Ethan Blackwell's penthouse. The air was cold, almost sterile, like the man himself. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, giving a view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. It felt less like a home and more like a throne, a fortress built high above the city where ordinary people like her did not belong. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her second-hand shoes squeaking against the polished floor. She clutched her worn handbag tightly, the one that still smelled faintly of coffee from her waitressing shifts. Ethan walked ahead of her with measured steps, his presence filling every inch of the silence. Without turning, he spoke. "There are rules, Miss Bennett." His voice was steady, clipped, the tone of a man who was used to being obeyed. "You will attend public functions with me when required. You will keep up appearances. In private, you will stay out of my way. Our arrangement is strictly professional." Claire's jaw tightened. Every word sounded like a chain, binding her deeper into a life that was not her own. She wanted to fire back, to remind him that she was not property. But she bit her tongue. She had made her choice. Her brother's surgery depended on it. The first night under the same roof was suffocating. Claire tried to retreat into the guest room, but even the guest room was bigger than her entire apartment. She ran her fingers along the edge of the mahogany dresser, wondering how many secrets this house had witnessed. Down the hall, Ethan sat in his study, poring over documents. The glow of the desk lamp carving shadows across his sharp features. He glanced toward the closed door of the guest room, his mind unexpectedly lingering on the woman inside. She was unlike anyone he had ever dealt with. No polished socialite smiles, no calculated seduction, just raw defiance mixed with fear. He shook the thought away. This was business. Nothing more. The following morning, Claire woke to the sound of clinking silverware. She entered the kitchen cautiously and froze. Ethan was there, dressed impeccably even at breakfast, scrolling through financial reports on a tablet. A chef moved swiftly around the counters, laying out a meal that looked more like art than food. Claire felt her stomach twist. She had planned to make instant oatmeal before heading to her shift, but here she was, staring at plates of fresh salmon, fruit cut into perfect cubes, and bread warm from a private oven. She whispered a thank you to the chef, her cheeks burning with discomfort. Ethan's eyes flicked up from his screen. "You should eat properly. You look like someone who forgets to take care of herself." The comment stung more than she expected. Claire placed a piece of bread on her plate, but did not reply. His world was effortless abundance, while hers was survival. The contrast between them was as sharp as the silver knife resting beside her plate. Later that week came their first test in public. Ethan's company was hosting a gala at a downtown hotel, and appearances had to be flawless. Claire stood before the mirror in a gown borrowed from the mansion's endless closets. She barely recognized herself. The fabric clung to her in a way that made her look powerful, but the reflection in her eyes betrayed her nerves. Ethan appeared at the doorway, his tuxedo crisp, his gaze assessing. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost reluctantly, he offered his arm. "Remember, Miss Bennett, tonight we are convincing the world." At the gala, crystal chandeliers rained light over the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered. All eyes turned to Ethan Blackwell and the mysterious woman at his side. Claire forced a smile, every muscle aching from the effort. She leaned closer to Ethan, playing the part she had been hired to play. And then it happened. A business rival approached, his eyes narrowing at Claire with suspicion. "So this is the wife, Ethan. I thought she was just a rumor." Without hesitation, Ethan slipped his arm tighter around Claire's waist. He lowered his voice, so close that only she could hear. "Smile. This is where you earn your keep." Before she could protest, Ethan bent his head and pressed his lips against hers. It was meant to be a show, nothing more than proof to silence the doubters. But for Claire, the world seemed to stop. The music faded, the whispers blurred, and all she felt was the heat of his lips against hers. When the kiss ended, Ethan pulled back smoothly, as if nothing had happened. To everyone else, it was just a display of affection between newlyweds. To Claire, it was the first crack in the contract, the first D. Angerous step into feelings she had promised herself she would never feel. That night, lying awake in the oversized bed of the guest room, Claire touched her lips with trembling fingers. She told herself it was just part of the deal. But her heart was already betraying her. The kiss at the gala was supposed to be forgotten the moment the cameras stopped flashing, yet its shadow lingered. Claire tried to convince herself it had meant nothing, but her heart refused to obey. The next morning, when she passed Ethan in the corridor, she felt her pulse quicken, as if her own body betrayed her. He offered no sign that he remembered. No glance, no hesitation. Only the same distant composure of a man too powerful to bend. Days turned into weeks, and with every public appearance, the weight of their performance grew heavier. At charity dinners, Ethan placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her with effortless control. At ribbon-cutting ceremonies, he leaned in close for whispered exchanges that looked like secrets meant for lovers. To the world, they were the perfect couple. To Claire, it was a masquerade that cut deeper every time. Whispers began circling in the press. Headlines called her the mystery wife and Cinderella from nowhere. Reporters dug into her past, searching for cracks in the illusion. Claire's coworkers at the hotel stared at her differently now, some with envy, others with disbelief. Even her landlord, who had once dismissed her with a smirk, suddenly spoke to her with respect. But it was the scrutiny of Ethan's family that hurt the most. At a private dinner in the Blackwell estate, his aunt leaned across the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Tell me, Claire," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with condescension. "What exactly did you do before marrying into our family? Surely it must be difficult adjusting to all of this." Claire's fork froze midway to her lips. She wanted to speak honestly, to tell them about double shifts and sleepless nights, about struggling to keep her brother alive. But Ethan's hand brushed hers under the table, a silent warning. She forced a smile. "It is an adjustment, yes. But I am learning quickly." The room chuckled lightly, but Claire felt the sting of humiliation. To them, she was not a wife. She was a stranger, wearing borrowed jewels, a temporary fixture at Ethan's side. That night, as they drove back to the penthouse, Claire stared out at the city lights and finally broke the silence. "Why did you not say anything? You let them belittle me as if I am nothing." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw flexed, his eyes locked on the road. "You wanted this, Claire. You signed the contract. Part of that contract is enduring what comes with my name. If you cannot handle that, perhaps you were not the right choice." The words cut deep, sharper than she expected. She turned her face away, blinking back tears. She told herself she did not care, that his approval was never what she wanted. But the ache in her chest said otherwise. Over the following days, the tension between them thickened. Yet beneath the sharp words and icy silences, small moments slipped through. When Claire caught the flu, Ethan appeared at her door with a tray of soup prepared by the chef. He set it on the nightstand without a word, but when she struggled to sit up, his hand steadied her shoulder, firm yet unexpectedly gentle. She whispered, "You did not have to do this." Ethan's eyes flickered, softer for a fraction of a second. "I take care of what is mine." The phrase echoed in her mind long after he left. What is mine? She wanted to dismiss it as arrogance, yet there was something in his tone that felt less like ownership and more like reluctant concern. But the outside world refused to give them peace. At another gala, a reporter cornered Claire near the balcony, his camera flashing relentlessly. "People say your marriage is just for show," he pressed. "That Ethan Blackwell would never choose a woman like you unless there was something hidden. Care to comment?" Before Claire could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. His voice was calm but edged with warning. "My wife does not need to justify herself to anyone. You have your photograph, now leave." The reporter retreated, but the damage was done. Claire's cheeks burned with shame and doubt. She wanted to scream at Ethan, to demand why he defended her in public, only to dismiss her in private. But when she glanced up at him, she saw a flicker of something unguarded in his eyes, something that felt dangerously close to real. And that was the most terrifying part. Because every time Ethan Blackwell blurred the line between contract and something else, Claire's heart stepped closer to the edge of believing. And if she fell, there would be no contract strong enough to catch her. The night after the gala confrontation with the reporter, Claire found herself restless. She wandered through the penthouse, her bare feet silent against the marble floors, until she stopped at the study. The door was slightly ajar, and inside Ethan sat with his head bowed over a stack of documents. His jacket was draped across the chair, his tie loosened, the weight of the world pressing into the hard lines of his shoulders. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable millionaire who dictated terms, but as a man carrying burdens no one else could see. Against her better judgment, she stepped inside. "You are working too hard," she said softly. Ethan looked up, startled. For a moment, his eyes softened, then the mask returned. "That is what it takes to keep all of this from collapsing," he replied. Claire hesitated, then moved closer. "You think money and contracts can keep everything together. But sometimes what people need is not control. Sometimes they just need someone who will stay." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet piercing. Ethan studied her, as though he wanted to respond but could not find the language. At last, he set down his pen. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be worse if you do not." Claire returned to her room, but the image of Ethan's tired face stayed with her. She told herself she did not care, yet something deep inside whispered otherwise. The following days tested them even further. Ethan's company faced a scandal after a competitor leaked private negotiations. Share prices dipped, and whispers spread that Ethan was losing his grip. The board demanded reassurance, and his marriage became the symbol of that reassurance. Claire was pulled into photo shoots, interviews, and appearances designed to showcase stability. One afternoon, while posing for a magazine spread in the penthouse, Claire reached for a book on a shelf as part of the stage scene. The book slipped from her fingers and fell open on the floor. Inside, she found a faded photograph of Ethan as a boy, standing beside his father. His smile was wide, his hand gripping a toy car. It was the first time she had seen proof that Ethan had once been human, once innocent. When she looked up, Ethan was watching her. His expression hardened instantly, as if he regretted letting her glimpse a part of him that no one else was allowed to see. He snatched the photo from the floor and closed the book. "Stay out of my things," he warned. Claire's throat tightened. "I did not mean to blank." But Ethan had already turned away, his voice cold. Intentions do not matter, boundaries do. The distance between them widened, yet the memory of that photograph refused to leave her mind. She had seen a side of him that contradicted everything he wanted her to believe. The next evening, a storm rolled over Manhattan, rain slashing against the glass walls. Claire sat by the window, hugging her knees, when the power flickered and went out. The penthouse plunged into shadows, the city below blurred by sheets of rain. She lit a candle from the kitchen and carried it down the hall, only to find Ethan standing at the balcony doors, staring into the storm. "Does nothing scare you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan turned, the flickering light catching the edges of his face. "Fear is a luxury I cannot afford." Claire stepped closer, the candle casting their shadows together on the wall. "You pretend nothing touches you, but I saw the boy in that picture. I know you are not made of stone, Ethan." Something in him cracked then, just enough for her to glimpse the truth. He stepped forward, his voice low. "You think you know me, Claire, but if you did, you would run." Her heart pounded. "Then give me the chance to decide for myself." The silence between them deepened, charged with unspoken truths. And in that moment, the contract felt like a fragile lie compared to the weight of what was forming between them. When the lights finally returned, the world seemed unchanged, but Claire knew better. A storm had broken inside both of them, and no contract, no performance, could hold it back forever. The storm outside had faded, but the storm inside, Ethan and Claire, only grew stronger. For days after the power outage, their interactions carried a weight neither of them could deny. Claire found herself catching his gaze, lingering a second too long, his tone softening in moments when no one else was listening. But just as quickly, he would retreat, hiding behind the contract like armor. The world, however, offered no room for hesitation. A leaked article began circulating online, suggesting that Claire was nothing more than a hired actress in a staged marriage. Headlines screamed of fraud, betrayal, and manipulation. Paparazzi crowded the entrance of the penthouse, shouting questions that made Claire's chest tighten with shame. When she confronted Ethan with the magazine in her hand, her voice trembled. "They are calling me a fraud. They are saying this marriage is nothing but a game. Tell me, Ethan, do you even care what this is doing to me?" Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, his posture rigid. "Let them talk. The truth does not matter as long as the board remains satisfied." His indifference cut deeper than any headline. Claire's throat burned as she forced out the words. "The truth may not matter to you, but it matters to me. I am not a pawn in your empire." Ethan turned then, his eyes blazing with something fierce. "You signed the contract. You agreed to this. Do not pretend you did not know what you were trading." Tears blurred her vision. "I signed to save my brother's life, not to sell my soul." For a moment, silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then Ethan's voice dropped, almost broken. "And I signed because it was the only way to keep everything from falling apart." But his admission did not ease her pain. Claire's heart felt shattered by the cruel reality, no matter what sparks flickered between them. To him, she was still just a convenient solution. That night, she packed a small bag. Standing in the guest room, her hands shook as she folded the few clothes she had brought into the penthouse. Every memory of Ethan, his fleeting tenderness, his protective grip at the gala, The stormlit conversation on the balcony stabbed at her chest as she tried to convince herself to leave. When Ethan found her at the door, suitcase in hand, his voice cracked for the first time. "Claire, what are you doing?" She met his eyes, tears spilling freely. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep pretending that this is only business while my heart is breaking." Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back. "You said it yourself, Ethan. Boundaries. And I cannot live inside boundaries that choke me." Her footsteps echoed through the marble foyer as she walked away, each step heavier than the last. Ethan stood frozen, watching the one woman who had dared to challenge him disappear into the storm outside. For the first time in his life, the empire he had fought so hard to protect felt utterly meaningless. Because without her, the walls of his penthouse were nothing more than an empty cage. The sound of Claire's footsteps, leaving the penthouse, echoed in Ethan's mind long after the door closed. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Contracts, wealth, and power had always been enough to bend the world to his will, but none of it could bring her back once she had chosen to walk away. Days passed in silence. The penthouse, once a fortress, now felt hollow. Ethan tried to bury himself in work, but every document blurred before his eyes. Every room carried her presence, the faint scent of her perfume in the hallway, the memory of her laughter echoing against glass walls. He poured himself a drink late one night, staring at the city below, and whispered words he would never admit to anyone. "I should have stopped you." Meanwhile, Claire returned to her modest apartment in Queens. The walls were cracked, the heater rattled, and the air smelled faintly of dust. Yet for the first time in months, it was hers. She cooked simple meals, worked shifts at the hotel again, and tried to remind herself that this was freedom. But every night, as she tucked her brother into bed after his treatments, she felt the absence of Ethan's shadow, the strange comfort of his presence she had grown used to. One evening, while carrying groceries up the narrow stairs, Claire overheard neighbors whispering, "That is her, the Blackwell wife, or should I say, ex-wife. I heard it was all fake." The sting of their words cut deep, but she kept walking, refusing to let them see her flinch. At the same time, Ethan's empire began to tremble. Without Claire by his side, the press seized the story with renewed fury. Articles speculated about their separation, investors questioned his stability, and whispers of a hostile takeover spread through the boardroom. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, piece by piece. During a heated board meeting, one director sneered. "You built your empire on appearances, Ethan. Now the illusion is shattered. Who will trust a man who cannot even hold his marriage together?" The words struck harder than Ethan expected. He realized then that what he had lost was not just a shield for his empire, it was Claire herself. The woman who had stood by him in front of flashing cameras, who had endured scorn for his sake, who had seen the broken boy behind his mask. Late that night, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the unsigned papers scattered across his desk. His reflection in the glass wall looked more like a stranger than the man he had once been. For the first time, he admitted the truth aloud. It was never just business. It was her. It has always been her. But by then, Claire was gone, and the distance between them felt impossible to cross. She had made her choice, and Ethan had no right to drag her back. Still, in the quiet hours of the night, one thought refused to leave him. Contracts could be torn apart, empires could fall, but the memory of her lips, the warmth of her defiance, and the light she brought into his world, those could never be erased. And as the city outside glittered indifferently, Ethan Blackwell, the man who had once believed he could control everything, found himself facing the one truth he could not escape. Without Claire Bennett, all his power meant nothing. Weeks slipped by, but the distance between Claire and Ethan did not silence the truth. It only magnified it. Claire buried herself in routine, balancing shifts at the hotel with late nights caring for her brother. Yet no matter how hard she worked, memories of Ethan haunted her. She could not forget the stormlit balcony, his rare moments of tenderness, or the way his lips had burned against hers at the gala. Then, one afternoon, as she returned from the pharmacy, she found a man waiting near her apartment building. It was Mr. Halston, Ethan's longtime legal advisor. His expression was heavy, his suit damp from the drizzle. "Miss Bennett," he said, lowering his voice, You should know something. Ethan never filed the clause that would protect him if the contract ended early. Legally, he left himself exposed. Financially, he risked everything. Claire blinked, confused. Why would he do that? He never leaves himself vulnerable. Halston's gaze softened. Because he wanted you to have the choice. He wanted you free, not bound by papers. For a man like Ethan Blackwell, that was the greatest risk of all. The words struck Claire like thunder. She realized then that every time Ethan had hidden behind his cold exterior, there had been a truth beneath it. His actions had been real, not staged. The soup he brought when she was sick, the kiss that lingered too long, the storm where he had almost confessed himself, none of it had been performance. That night, Claire lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment. She remembered his voice on the night she left. "Claire, what are you doing?" At the time, she had thought it was anger. Now she heard it differently. It had been desperation. Her chest ached with the realization. Ethan had not just used her to protect his empire. He had been trying, in his own flawed and broken way, to protect her too. The next morning, as the city stirred awake, Claire stood at her window and whispered to herself, "It was never just a contract, it was us." And with that, she knew her story with Ethan was far from over. The revelation about the contract tore down the final wall Claire had built around her heart. For days she wrestled with the truth, until one evening the decision became clear: she could not let fear write the end of their story. That same night, Ethan faced his most ruthless board meeting yet. Investors demanded his resignation, declaring that his personal scandal had crippled the company's image. Cameras waited outside, reporters hungry for the downfall of the Blackwell heir. Ethan stood at the head of the table, calm on the surface but hollow inside. For the first time, he considered surrendering everything. Without Claire, his empire was already meaningless. Then the doors burst open. Claire stepped inside, her presence silencing the room. She was not in borrowed jewels or designer gowns, but in a simple dress, her eyes steady with conviction. Gasps rippled through the crowd as cameras flashed wildly. "I am here," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the chamber. "Not because of a contract, not because of obligation. I am here because I love Ethan Blackwell." Ethan froze. The board murmured in disbelief, but Claire pressed on, her voice unshaken. "You call our marriage a performance. You call me unworthy. But I know the truth. This man risked everything to give me freedom, even if it meant losing his empire. That is not fraud. That is love. And I will not let anyone take that from us." The room erupted in chaos, directors arguing, reporters shouting, but none of it mattered. Ethan crossed the floor, his composure breaking, and took her face in his hands. "Claire," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time, "I never wanted a contract. I only wanted you." And there, in front of flashing cameras and the people who had doubted them most, Ethan kissed her. This time, it was not strategy. It was not performance. It was the truth laid bare, a vow stronger than any contract ever signed. The boardroom was still buzzing with voices when Ethan finally pulled back from the kiss. His hand remained on Claire's cheek as if anchoring himself to the only thing that mattered. Around them, power and money fought for dominance. But for Ethan Blackwell, the decision was already made. He turned to the board, his voice steady but filled with steel. "You may question my leadership, you may even take my empire, but you will never question my love for this woman again. Claire Bennett is my wife, not by contract, but by choice." The room fell silent. Even the most skeptical directors could not deny the conviction in his tone, or the way Claire stood beside him with unshaken resolve. For the first time, Ethan had chosen vulnerability over power, and that choice commanded more respect than all his fortune ever had. Later that evening, away from flashing cameras and tense meetings, Ethan and Claire returned to the penthouse. The air felt different, no longer a cage, but a home. Claire placed the old contract on the marble counter and, without hesitation, tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed like freedom. Ethan reached into his pocket and revealed something he had kept hidden for weeks: a velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple yet breathtaking, nothing like the jewelry borrowed for appearances. "This time," he said softly, "no contracts, no conditions, just us. Will you stay, not because you have to, but because you want to?" Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing a vow that no signature could capture. And when he kissed her again, there were no reporters, no investors, no doubts, only the raw truth of two souls who had defied the weight of the world. In the end, the empire did not fall, it transformed. Because for the first time, Ethan Blackwell was not leading alone. He was leading with the woman who had taught him that real power was not in contracts or wealth, but in love freely chosen. And for Claire, the girl who once clutched hospital bills in the rain, she was no longer surviving. She was finally living in a love that needed no disguise.